How's it going, everybody? Welcome to week 4, midweek check-in. Coming right along, moving right along on civilizations around the world. In this earliest phase of humans populating places and becoming complex, or forming complex societies. We've done Mesopotamia. We've done Egypt. Now we're kind of going to, this week we're going to East, or Asia, South Asia, East Asia, and looking at those societies that how did humans show up there, and how did they start becoming more complex? The first place we go is Indus, which I think is good. Hopefully, if you listen to that lecture, the Indus is one of the early civilizations we know the least about for various reasons. One, mainly they have a writing system, but we have yet to decipher it. So that's why in the lecture I talk about this idea of inference. Like historians use a lot of that when they're looking at evidence that they're not quite sure about, right? They can look at other examples, say Mesopotamia, Egypt, that we do know a lot about, and say, okay, this is how they worked in this civilization. Here's similar objects, artifacts, ideas that we have in this context, so we can infer that maybe this is part of religion, or part of politics, or part of the material culture, or related to economics. So that's kind of how I talked about that in the lecture, and that we kind of rebuilding the Indus by how we can take these features and functions of other early civilizations and apply them there. So and I showed you the seals, the Indus seals. Those are very popular. They're very popular, but very prolific around the ancient world. They're found all over, and those are the ones that have the writing. We have yet to find like a full, like a tablet, like the Epic of Gilgamesh in the Indus. Maybe it'll pop up. We're always hoping for. Nor have we found like a Rosetta Stone to help us translate it. So that's the Indus world. On the Indus River, rivers are always important. And then the other part of that, once the Indus sort of declines, talked about that, the next phase is this Vedic phase of the Vedas, these Indo-Aryans who speak this Indo-European language, which again, I sort of talk about the idea that how do you trace languages through cognates, and I gave examples of how English is ultimately related to the language of Hindi, so the Indo and the European side of that. And there's other language families throughout the world, Bantu and Sub-Saharan Africa, and as we'll get to next week, within Polynesia, the Austronesian language families. And we talked about the Vedas. I gave some readings there in a little lecture about how we use these oral traditions as primary sources as well. Then we get into China, and two rivers, not quite as close together as Mesopotamia. The Yellow and the Yangtze, I talk about them a little bit, the earlier sort of mythical emperors of China, and then we get into history of the Shang and the Zhao and material culture. This idea of oracle bones as the writing system of China, this idea of prophecies as well, which gets us into the I Ching, which I gave you a video of. Try it out if you want. If you have a question, they've been doing this in China for 3,000 years. If you have a question, you can consult and make your little hexagram, consult the I Ching, and then they can provide some answers to you. And then Japan, a little bit different, right? Because it's an island. A lot of people came over there in the Paleolithic period. And then as the sea levels rose back up, they were in Japan, and this is kind of the Jomon period, a little bit cut off from mainland Asia, China, and Korea. So they know their own culture, their own societies, their own pottery, which we see, but remained, the one thing they sort of lacked is full-scale agriculture. The introduction of rice will come in a later period of Japanese history. So they mainly lived sort of more hunting, gathering, a lot of marine resources, obviously, because they're an island. There were a couple items that they did domesticate a little bit more, nuts and beans, but nothing, no major crops. Rice will come a little bit later. That's the Jomon period, but they did, we're talking like 10,000 years of society in Japan, but also these Ainu people, another group of people that came into Japan as well, and they're still around Japan today. And then Korea is really interesting, sort of a lot much more connected to China, and you can even see in Chinese history sort of this Shang, when the Shang declined, there's an idea, a story of the Shang kings coming into Korea and introducing statecraft, right? And so you can kind of see that early connection between Korea and China. But people existed in Korea long before that and migrated from North Korea to South Korea over through the mountains and then into the peninsula as well. So that's kind of the major ideas of this week. Just looking at civilizations, complex societies, getting an idea. We're laying a groundwork for the world. By the end of next week, we'll know pretty much where everything stood up into about 500 BC in the world, where humans were. So this first 5 weeks, we've gone from the blip of the Big Bang to how Earth and humans came about to the early civilizations on a global scale. So that's the knowledge, and then this week you have your sort of first sort of history paper or thought assessment, if you will, assignment, where I ask you to pick an artifact, any artifact, of civilizations we've covered in this class. So that's Egypt, Mesopotamia. If you want to do some Neolithic things, you could, or Paleolithic things, that's fine too. But Egypt, Mesopotamia, Indus, China, Japan, China Shang or Zhou, Japan, Korea. Next week we're going to look at the Americas and Oceania. If you want to do something from there, that's fine. Just make sure that it dates, the artifact itself dates before 0 CE. So, for example, the big reason I'm saying that is, they don't believe that humans had arrived in Hawaii by 0 CE. So things in Hawaii didn't exist then. So, or human interactions there didn't exist. The islands did. So if you want to do something from Pacific, you would be looking at Lapita, the Lapita peoples who were spreading through that, or early Austronesian people. So there were people that were moving through the Polynesia, but just be careful of the dating there. Similar with the Americas. I mean, there's plenty of indigenous artifacts there, but don't do something from like the Aztecs or like early colonization, early British or Spanish colonization. Make sure it dates to pre the artifact, whatever it is, dates to before 0, so BC some point, because that's kind of what we're looking at. So just double check on that as part of the assignment guidelines. So read those over, and the assignment itself, it's about 300 words, so kind of like a page-ish, if you will. The assignment says split those up into 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph, explain what this artifact is. Make sure on your Padlet you provide a picture of it and a link to wherever you're getting this information. But the second part, that's where I want you to be sort of a historian. We've talked about these societies. Explain to me in your own words how this artifact is significant to this culture. What does it tell us about? I mean, this idea, this is the idea of you're working with a primary source. What is this primary source? First part, explain what it is. Second part, explain what it tells us about this society. And use your inference. What do we know? How can we look? And again, you can really just use the course materials. Here's what we learned about Mesopotamia. Where does it fit in there? Or Egypt, when we talked a little bit about Egyptian religion. It doesn't have to be too complex. You only have like 150 words. You don't need to really even use too many outside sources. If you do, please cite those as well. But be a historian. Take a primary source. Work through that. What can we learn about the society from this artifact, right? So, I think that's it for this week. Have a good rest of your week.